Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of ESET East Africa's webinar series. Today we'll be covering Pulseway, our remote monitoring and management tool. As usual, as we go along, please feel free to put any questions that you have in the Q&A section, and then we'll get around to answering those towards the end of the webinar. So to start off, first things first is we're just going to explain on why you typically need an RMM tool like Pulseway or something similar. And the first point that I'd like to make is obviously only monitoring things is highly inefficient, because typically if you're only monitoring things with limited ways of interacting with those systems from your monitoring system, then essentially it means that you're always reactive. Right, whenever a problem crops up or whenever something is detected on your environment or on your infrastructure, you need to look at the monitoring solution, you need to determine what exactly is the problem, and then subsequently you need to go and investigate in order to determine what is obviously causing said problem. The second point is that it speeds up the resolution of the problems mentioned before. Typically any RMM tool involves some level of integration into various types of software, ranging from your backup and DR solutions, potentially to your antivirus. It may also have some type of component like a VNC session like TeamViewer, for example, so that you can remote into a machine. You can often chat with users remotely while they're sitting at their endpoint in order to get an understanding of what they're experiencing in terms of what you've detected. So aside from obviously having all sorts of integration so that you can potentially fix the problem from your RMM tool as opposed to needing to log into a machine remotely, that's obviously why it speeds up the resolution. Then it reduces the reliance on many different systems for a particular problem, right? The entire idea of an RMM tool is that you have a single pane of glass for everything in your infrastructure. So you've got one place where you can see the status of services, of network interfaces, of temperature sensors, for example, if it's a machine sitting in a data center or if it's a machine sitting in a warm office somewhere. So it essentially means that you're centralizing all of that information, and it obviously means that you can act on that more efficiently. And then the last point is obviously explained through everything that I've mentioned before, is the principle that you can manage all of your clients or your company servers or your endpoints in one place. So typically an RMM solution would be multi-tenant. So it means that you can add all of your customers as a managed service provider, for example, and essentially monitor and manage all of their servers and all of the endpoints for all of your customers. So obviously that makes you incredibly efficient while operating an MSP type business. So what are the problems that you typically encounter with a lot of RMM solutions on the market? So the first point is that most RMM solutions come with a steep learning curve. Here I'm referring to solutions like Kaseya and to a lesser extent things like Manage Engine or GFI Max. They're also typically very expensive, and we'll cover more on that in some of the other points. And there's usually a high level of support required to keep the solution performing optimally or to actually get it integrated and monitoring the systems that you deem necessary. So when we speak about RMM solutions and the likes of Enable, Kaseya, GFI Max, and a couple of others, they're essentially offering a bundled solution where you can get a varying mix of products like your antivirus, your backup and DR solution, potentially your encryption, and more from one vendor, right? Essentially what they're doing is they've contracted with other vendors in order to bundle that service offering so that you've essentially got a one-stop shop to buy things. So incidentally, StorageCraft, which is our backup and DR solution, has also previously been included or is currently part of Enable and Kaseya, amongst others. So the downside to this is that there's generally little to no integration with, say, a competing DR or antivirus product because it's not part of their bundled offering, right? So you'll find that, and we've heard it about this repeatedly from customers moving away from Enable to something like Pulseway, is that they try to charge you extra essentially around every corner, right? If you need a specific feature, or if you need a new module, or if you need something that essentially has all of the things that you need straight out of the box, that's where they ask for additional licensing fees, or you need to pay extra because that module is not included as part of the base product and so on. So that's essentially why, in terms of the benefits, the bundled solutions actually benefit the vendor more than the customer, because they're actually just causing more issues for the customer. Because that leads me to the next point of vendor tie-in, because now you're stuck with a particular set of products, even if something better might be available, right? So you might not like the antivirus that the RMM provider is bundling as part of their offering. But if you don't use that antivirus, then you don't get alerting information. And Enable is a good example of that. I speak under correction, but I think they use Bitdefender. And if you don't use Bitdefender as part of your Enable account, or as part of your package, or as part of your bundle, then you've got a giant red flag for your reports, because they don't support monitoring other vendors' antivirus solutions. And all in all, that essentially makes all of these other RMM tools inflexible for a multitude of reasons. So how do we approach all of these problems? Obviously, our solution is Pulseway, as you saw in the title slide. A few key features, first of which is that it's a completely cross-platform solution. So whether you want to monitor Windows or Linux or Mac OS X, or even if you want to monitor, say, a Raspberry Pi, for example, there are packages available for pretty much any Linux distribution you can think of, as well as all of the unique development boards, such as a Raspberry Pi. It also happens to be by far the easiest solution to deploy on the market. Having been fortunate enough to play around with a lot of different RMM tools throughout my career, it essentially means that I've seen the good and the bad of a lot of RMM solutions on the market, and I can certainly vouch for the fact that Pulseway is by far the easiest to deploy. Then, of course, in terms of monitoring, you can monitor absolutely anything and everything you can think of, and I'll show you the capabilities of the tool as we get to the demo a little bit later. And you can monitor it from anywhere, right? So whether you want to use a web interface, or if you want to use the app on your smartphone, or if you want to use the Metro or Modern app on Windows 8 or Windows 10, or if you want to rely on receiving email notifications instead of push notifications to the variety of apps, you can essentially get those alerts and notifications any way that you choose. There's also the remote desktop facility, which, as I mentioned, is kind of like a team viewer or a VNC. So you can essentially remote into a machine using the Pulseway applications. It also means that you don't need to allow any other firewall rules, exactly like a team viewer. And then there's a variety of server modules that offer a higher grade of integration and management. So again, I'm going to cover those as we get to the demo, but part of the idea behind Pulseway is that they readily integrate with any other software provider, whether it be anything as part of the Microsoft stack, like Hyper-V or IIS or SQL. All of these integration modules on the server side allow you to see all of that information centrally in Pulseway, getting around to that single pane of glass that I've mentioned. And often they allow a level of interaction with those systems. So in case of Active Directory, which I'll show you a little bit later, you can actually go in and you can reset people's passwords, you can change the expiration policy, you can assign them to different groups, and you can do all of this from, say, the web interface or from the mobile app. So you can essentially do this all from your phone if you need to do something quick while on the go or out of the office. So you don't necessarily need to go and get your laptop, potentially VPN into the respective network, log on to the domain controller, or open an instance of Server Manager, get your Active Directory users and computers, and obviously find the user and do what you need to do. There's also a robust and RESTful API available with lots of examples and documentation on the Pulseway website. So wherever there is not, say, a server module that you need because of some type of custom or third-party application, you can essentially integrate monitoring of that system by using the API. And because it's obviously RESTful, it means that you can interact with it using a number of programming languages that are available. So if you look at the Pulseway website and their API documentation, they give you step-by-step examples on how to do authentication and how to do certain triggers for alerts for a variety of languages ranging from C to Ruby to JSON and a number of other programming languages that are available. It also integrates with a number of different ticket systems currently, so it already integrates into the likes of Autotask and Zendesk. We are working with the vendor to get integration working into our ticket system, which is Freshdesk. And they also support a third-party notification system in the form of, I forget the name of the application, but we'll get to that later because I'll show you in the agent. It's also vendor agnostic. So as I mentioned before, one of the issues with a lot of RMM vendors out there is that you're tied into using a specific product from a specific vendor. And Pulseway approaches this problem very differently. They readily integrate with any vendor, which is why when you get to backup, currently they need to update the integration with StorageCraft, which is our backup and DR solution, and they also will be adding integration into Symantec's Backup Exec, for example. And as I've already mentioned, in the case of ticket system integrations, they already support 2, and further down the road, they will support 3 or 4. So no matter what products you use or which vendor you use for the variety of IT security software that you might have on your network or at your customer's premises, it means that you'll readily be able to either integrate them out of the box because they've added the appropriate server modules into Pulseway so that you can just tick a box and then maybe provide some additional configuration details like a username and password, and off you go. Or, as I mentioned, with the API, you can actually integrate anything else that you may choose. There's also a rules section. So the rules section basically allows you to essentially automate some actions based on a particular issue. So let's say, for example, it detects that a service has stopped. You can create a rule to try and automatically restart that service over and above the service settings that might be available in the Windows operating system. And that's obviously a silly example, which we'll get to later on as well. Then from a pricing perspective, it's currently annual billing only. The monthly or MSP options will be made available soon to everyone. But if you do have to get some type of monthly arrangement, get in touch and we can see what we can arrange for you in the interim. It also fits all organizations, so it doesn't matter if it's a small environment with, say, 10 endpoints or a large enterprise with thousands of endpoints. The solution is both cost-effective enough as well as easy enough to deploy so that you can actually make it fit for any organization size. And then additionally, it's the same price for servers versus workstations. So that's another big differentiator when you look at some of the other products on the market. Typically, they charge you a lot more for servers as opposed to workstations. Or they might charge you more for specific server modules like monitoring SQL as an example, or they might charge you more, as I mentioned earlier, with the additional modules that they might charge you for if you need additional reporting capabilities or anything like that. Whereas Pulseway is absolutely all-inclusive. So no matter what feature you are looking at, anything and everything that I'll be showing you is available as part of your normal license because they don't charge extra for anything else besides maybe getting some additional user accounts or trying to monitor more systems. So it's purely a quantity thing as opposed to needing to pay for an additional feature or module. And then, of course, in terms of our competitors, the biggest competitors that we come up against are Enable, Kaseya, and then Control Now, which is obviously part of the Max suite of products. Then just to show you very briefly some of the features or integrations that are currently available. In this little grid layout, I've obviously shown that there's Pulseway sitting in the middle, and all of the Microsoft applications that it currently integrates with, and then a lot of the other third-party modules that it integrates with as well. And I'll actually cover that as we go along in the demo, which is essentially up next. So give me a couple of moments while I prepare that, and I will share my screen again with you in just a moment. Right, so the first thing that I want to show you is the Pulseway agent or manager. So this is the agent that will be installed on every machine that you want to monitor through Pulseway. I'm not going to go into every single little thing in detail, but there are obviously a number of things that I'd like to show you. First of which is obviously providing the authentication details. And in the case of the enterprise server license, which is the on-premise version that we offer, you obviously need to specify the server name that it's going to connect to. You can give the machine a name. This can be different from the machine's host name, but obviously it makes sense to make it the same in order for you to identify the systems properly. I've assigned it to a group, and the important point about this is as a group, this is what I would typically use to define the client name. So in the event that you want to have one Pulseway instance and you want to monitor the endpoints and servers and so on for a variety of customers using a single instance, then I would assign those to a group with that customer name. So client A, client B, and so on. And then once I show you the web interface on the Metro app, you'll see that I can use tags in order to differentiate things like all of the servers across all of my customers, or all of the workstations, or all of the Windows machines, and so on. So this is what you would use in order to divide between your customers. From a system perspective, this just basically shows a list of allowed commands that I have configured on this particular server. I've also enabled the ability to take a screenshot or remotely view a snapshot of the screen. I can also chat with the user that's currently logged in. You can also opt to enable the webcam view, so you can essentially take a photo of what's behind the webcam at any time. And you can also allow the user support request functions. And what that does is it adds a little icon into the system tray. And this is especially useful for the endpoints at a customer, so the workstations and the laptops, because it basically allows the user to right-click on the icon and actually request support. So they can then maybe say, hi, my computer is really slow at the moment, as a silly example. That'll then come through as a push notification to all of the devices enrolled into your Pulseway instance, and then you'll be able to act on that issue. So you can quickly have a look and see the resource utilization for that endpoint, and maybe you can see, okay, maybe a browser or a specific application has consumed most of the RAM, or is using up all of the CPU. And obviously then you can inform them to maybe restart a specific application, or you can do it for them remotely if you'd like. Then in terms of service monitoring, so this is obviously service monitoring for the Microsoft applications, for a Microsoft operating system, and monitoring a service is as easy as ticking a box. So you'll notice that the server happens to run, the server actually is our Pulseway server, which runs within IIS, and that's also why I'm monitoring things like SQL. I'm also monitoring the StorageCraft SPX service to make sure that it's always running, and a couple of other things as well. So essentially monitoring the service is as easy as ticking the box. Then in terms of network, exactly the same principle, and you'll see the same trend as we go along. A lot of the things is as easy as simply ticking the box for the item that you actually want to monitor. Then you can also monitor ports, both local and remote. So what I'm doing here is I'm monitoring port 443 locally, because that's obviously making sure that the Pulseway HTTPS service is actually running. I'm also monitoring the local port for StorageCraft SPX to make sure that I can always connect to that, and that the service is obviously running. And then I can also do remote port monitoring on my Active Directory domain controller. So I'm monitoring its DNS service port as well as LDAP, for example. Then I can also do a basic ping response monitor to any IP address, but there's also variable ping response monitoring, which I'll get to a little bit later. I can also enable the remote desktop feature, so that is optional. You can disable it for maybe a sensitive endpoint if you'd like, but obviously it decreases your efficiency, so I tend to always use it wherever possible. Same thing like with services, monitoring a scheduled task, again, is as easy as ticking a box next to the appropriate scheduled task. And then one of the real strengths of the product is the monitoring of performance counters, right? So I can go and add over here, I can pick a category of any of the performance counter categories that are available. Let me just pick something random. Any category can have any number of instances, so I can select an instance and then I can tick all of the counters that I would like to monitor. So you can get some pretty in-depth and granular information out of the performance counters on any Microsoft system and actually view that on your phone or in a web browser or whatever the case may be. I can also do monitoring of SSL certificates. I can also do monitoring of websites using a GET or a HEAD request, depending on your preference. I can also enable a remote file browser. I don't have that enabled on the server at the moment, but it essentially means that you can browse remote directories remotely. And you can obviously choose to configure SMTP details so that you can potentially send one of those files to yourself via email, as an example. Then one of the other real core areas of the product is obviously the server modules in order to add various forms of integration. So it supports a wide variety of hypervisors ranging from VMware and Hyper-V and Zen, as well as the Amazon and the Azure cloud. It also has integration into a number of other Microsoft products, such as System Center Operations Manager, such as Windows Server Update Services, IIS, SQL, and a couple of others as well. And then more importantly, obviously Active Directory, which I will show in a little bit more detail later on. It also has integration into ESET's Remote Administrator version 5 currently. We're just waiting for them to update it in order for it to be compatible with version 6. Similarly, since StorageCraft has released SPX, we're just waiting for them to resolve a few issues on that side. And obviously the idea is that you'll be able to centralize all of that information and view it all in one place, as I mentioned. And then for any type of networking device, you can also monitor any number of SNMP agents. So I can go and manage an SNMP agent. I can either discover them on my network, or I can add one manually, and then once I've added one, I can add any number of variables. So this does rely on the fact that you know the variable name or OID that will be specific to that networking device, but most of the time you can consult the vendor or manufacturer documentation in the case of a physical device in order to obtain the OIDs and actually come and add all of those variables in here. Then, of course, you get to the notifications. So it's important to note that with everything that I've shown you thus far, that is just to enable monitoring. So it enables you to see that information either in the web interface or in the Metro app or on your phone, but it does not necessarily configure any notifications, and that's what this entire tab is for. Is over and above anything that you've chosen to monitor, here you will set up the notifications if you want to receive them, and of course the priority or elevation of that notification. So because this is a web server and because it's obviously a fairly important part of our infrastructure, I want to monitor if it goes offline. I want to monitor if it's shutting down. I want to be informed of any Windows updates that are available. I want to know if anything's being installed or uninstalled, as well as whether or not the firewall is being disabled. Because this is a virtual machine, I'm not monitoring smart disk errors, but I am doing that on my laptop, for example, which I'll show you in a moment. Then in terms of performance, obviously I want to be informed if the RAM on this machine drops below 10% available, or I also want to be informed if the CPU usage exceeds 90% for more than 5 minutes. So as you can see, it's quite granular in how you want to configure that. You can also do the reverse. So you sorry. So you can monitor whether or not the CPU usage is below a certain threshold. And you can also monitor if any of the monitored ports have actually been closed for a certain number of minutes, and then obviously the elevation of that alert that needs to be triggered. Then for the services, these are all the services that I had ticked under the service monitoring section, and now I can optionally elect to send notifications for each of these services. If I don't want to receive notifications for that, I simply leave it unticked and off I go. Then there's variable process monitoring as well, which can be quite useful. So you can either look for a specific process out of the running processes, or go and select a file, or specify a particular directory, and then monitor if that process has started, stopped, not responding, or if it's suddenly taken over the CPU with a certain threshold over a certain period of time. So that can be especially useful for troublesome applications, or applications that are prone to suddenly becoming very busy, so that you can keep an eye on that. And then this is the variable ping response monitoring that I mentioned earlier, where I just had the 8.8.8.8 Google DNS server entered. This is where I can add variable ping response monitoring. So I can add a host name or an IP address. I can give it an actual alias name so that I can easily identify it. And then I can set a threshold for the maximum acceptable latency and the time. And then I can obviously set a notification on no response, which is obviously far more critical than if it's just a slow response, because then it means that it is still available. Then in terms of storage, I can monitor disk space on any local disk, either in percentage or in a megabyte value. So that's really dependent on your preference. So for small drives, I don't have an issue using a percentage, because it still gives you a fairly accurate indication. Whereas if it's an extremely large drive, like say a 2 terabyte or a 1 terabyte drive, the percentage, say 15%, which is the default, is obviously quite high. So in those cases where it's a larger drive, I personally choose to rather select a space in megabytes, because they can generally go a little bit further than only having 15% left before it actually becomes an issue. Then there's also file monitoring. So I can monitor a directory or a specific file, and I can monitor for file changes, ranging from whether it has been written to, when it was last accessed, if the security settings have changed, if the size has changed, if the name has changed, if anything has been created or deleted. So that's obviously useful in terms of certain security measures that you might want to implement on your network, because it might be unusual for a lot of files to suddenly be created in a specific directory, or it might be strange if a number of file names are suddenly changing, because it could point to malicious activity on your network, for example. Then there's also event log monitoring, or alerts rather. It's important to note that even if this is unticked, you can always come and view the event log for any Windows machine remotely using any of the methods available. Again, the web interface or the Metro Modern app or your mobile phone. This is purely to monitor for specific events in the event log, right? So I can come in and I can go and select, say, the application log and the system log, or whatever the case may be. I can look for specific event levels, whether they're errors or warnings or just information. I can specify specific keywords or eliminate specific keywords, look for specific event IDs or sources. So one of the easy use cases here is I used to do a lot of on-site work previously, and one of the banes of my day-to-day was going to customers who had very old or poorly configured Pastel servers, so billing system servers. And what I typically found with especially the really old instances of on-premise Pastel servers is that they tended to have a lot of issues with their database servers, where the database server would stop functioning correctly, or it would stop responding, or there would be deadlocks, or whatever the case may be. And you could then come and monitor for the source or for the ID that is specifically generated by Pastel, as an example, in order to be alerted of anything being written to the event log. So over and above your normal day-to-day maintenance, where it might be a good idea to just check the event log for anything that might have occurred on that environment, the other very important point is you can make yourself more efficient, because you can monitor for specific events and then immediately go and act on that event after you receive a notification, rather than having to go and dig through event logs on, say, a daily or a weekly or whatever other time frame you deem appropriate as part of your maintenance, for example. Then, because this is a virtual machine, I'm not monitoring temperature sensors, but I will show you how I've configured that on my laptop in a moment. Then for all of the performance counters that you may have elected to monitor, you can now set up notifications as well. So I can also go and give it a name, I can select a category, I can select an instance, I can select the counters, and then I can set thresholds for the values on those counters. So if it's greater than, less than, or equal to a specific value for a specific period of time, and then I can be alerted to that issue. Then, of course, in terms of the website and SSL certificate monitoring that I showed a little bit earlier, I can now set the notifications for that. So I want to be informed if an SSL certificate is due to expire in the next 7 days, or if a website's not available for anything longer than a minute, then I want to know about it so that I can look into the problem. Then in terms of the server modules, in the case of something like IIS or VMware or anything else, there's various types of alerts that you can set up. For Active Directory, it's if you want to be informed of a user that accidentally locked themselves out. For Exchange, it can be anything if a mailbox is being mounted, or mailbox database is being mounted or dismounted, if there's a number of messages stuck in the queue, or if mailbox is running out of space or anything like that. In terms of all of the hypervisor integrations like Hyper-V and VMware and Amazon and so on, essentially what those alerts are is if there's any health alerts or warnings triggered by those systems, then you can centralize that again all in one place. In terms of IIS, I want to be informed if a site has stopped or if an application tool has stopped for more than 5 minutes. I want to be informed if there's any synchronization changes in Windows Server update services, for example. And for SQL, I want to know if a SQL query is taking more than 30 minutes to execute, because that would be an extremely long time and might be quite unusual, especially for this particular server of mine. I should actually come and change this later, because in this particular server, anything more than, say, 10 minutes is actually already far too long. I can also monitor if a database has grown past a certain point. I can monitor for deadlocks, and I can even monitor for specific SQL queries. So this is, again, very granular in terms of the notifications. So I can go in, I can specify a database name out of all of the databases that I've got available, and then I can select a query, I can try and execute that query, I can get a result, I can set an interval at which that needs to be executed, and then I can set conditions on what I want to be alerted on. So again, very granular in what you can configure in terms of SQL query notifications. And then obviously the idea behind backup integration, currently it already supports Windows Server backup. They need to just fix something with the Shadow Protect integration, and as I mentioned, they'll also be adding Symantec Backup Exec integration. And with all of those, it basically involves monitoring if backups are succeeding, in some cases whether or not they are failing, and then also in the case of StorageCraft, whether or not the license is due to expire. And then, of course, with the SNMP agents that you might add, you can go and monitor for specific variables, for specific OIDs, and then the variable needs to match a certain value or be greater than or equal than or less than, for example. Then in terms of the rules, so if I go and add a quick rule just to show you what I can add here, I can give it a name, I can give it a description, I can fire it off immediately if the below conditions are met, or if the conditions are met for a certain period of time. So that means that if it happens and it goes away within a minute, then it won't actually trigger the action, right? And then I can also send a notification. So I can go and add a logical condition saying that at least one of the following is true. I can then add a value, and the value can be maybe a day of the week, or a specific performance counter that has been triggered, or a service that I can go and select as maybe stopped, or is starting, or is pausing, or whatever the case may be. And then I can add a series of actions. So I can go and add an action that says maybe stop or start a task, run a task, or stop running a specific task, and add something in there. So I can maybe go and create a task that says try and restart the service automatically, or send this particular person an email, or whatever the case may be. So again, very granular in terms of the rules creation. And then, of course, when we get to the plugins, as I mentioned, because of the API that is available, there's also a fairly active community, right? So when you go onto the Pulseway websites and you go to the community, you'll notice that there's a lot of people and a lot of organizations who have actually written plugins that they have then made available to the community. So if there's something that you need to integrate with that might not be available out of the box, it's entirely possible that someone in the community has done so. So you can go and download that plugin, add it into the agent, and start using that in your own environment. And what I've also often found, because we've obviously been offering this product for a fairly long time, is there's also been cases where someone has created a plugin which Pulseway, the vendor, has deemed so useful that they've actually integrated it into the core of the product. So then you can do away with the plugin, and it's actually part of the Pulseway solution. Then in terms of available features, obviously there's just certain things that I can tick or untick in order to make them available to this agent. I can restrict certain devices from sending commands or only allow specific devices from sending commands. And then there's a few other settings such as centralizing notifications to a syslog server or a SIEM solution. This is where you can do the Zendesk and the Autotask integration if you use those as your ticket systems. And then that third-party notification system that I mentioned earlier that I forgot the name of is PagerDuty. So you can essentially have all of those alerts centralized in one place. Then you can also set up a predefined maintenance schedule, which is a very useful thing. Maybe there's a specific date or a specific day of the week that you log in and do certain types of maintenance which would generate alerts or notifications. So you can come and you can set a maintenance schedule so that during that time, because of the work that you're doing or because of the script that is running or because of the task that is running, that alerts are not generated because it would be unnecessary, and obviously you don't want to bother your technical staff with things that they don't actually need to fix. And then, of course, with anything that you're doing, if there is an alert that's generated and it's not in the maintenance schedule, you can easily come and put any agent in maintenance mode in order to actually mute any notifications that would be generated from this endpoint so that you can obviously fix the problem and then take it out of maintenance mode thereafter in order to continue monitoring as normal. So then just to show you very quickly the agent running on my laptop. So let me just open that up. It's exactly the same as the one that you see in the back. I just want to show you what I've done in terms of configuring my temperature sensor monitoring. So what I've done is under notifications, under hardware, I'm monitoring my CPU because I don't want it to exceed 70 degrees, and I'm monitoring my hard drive because I don't want that to exceed 50 degrees, for example. And what I'm also doing is I am obviously monitoring my hard disk for smart disk errors or anything like that because it's obviously a physical machine. So that's just a slight difference in how I've configured the two. And the next thing that I want to show you is the let me just show you very quickly the Pulseway dashboard. So this is an application that you can install anywhere. It's obviously, because of the nature of what it shows you, it's especially useful to put this up on a screen somewhere in your office so that everyone can see it, so that all of your technicians, all of your engineers can see it. And that obviously means that anyone at a glance has visibility over any errors or any notifications that have been generated for your infrastructure. So that you can consider it as, say, customer A, like I've got ESET over here, customer B, like I've got ESET Africa over there, and so on and so on. Or you can obviously rely on the tags that I've mentioned. And then it's kind of like a news station. You see this scrolling banner at the bottom that shows all of the alerts that are currently active across the environment. So that's a very useful little tool to use, especially when you've got a number of engineers or people that need to keep an eye on things. Then I also will show you very briefly the Pulseway remote desktop client, right? So this leverages that remote desktop capability that I showed you earlier. So for the same server that's sitting in the background here, I can quickly connect to it. See that there are a couple of sessions. That is actually the session that I'm on at the moment, I believe. So I'm going to start that remote desktop session. And that's exactly it. So now you can see the remote desktop app is open, I'm connected, and I see exactly the same that I saw in the background there. And obviously it's exactly like a team viewer that the user will be able to see what you're obviously doing. So the remote desktop feature is extremely straightforward. The next thing that I'm quickly going to show you is the Metro or modern application. So this is the application sitting on my laptop, which I then downloaded out of the Windows or Microsoft Store. That's where you will download it in order to get it onto your Windows 8 or Windows 10 machine. And if I just quickly look at this, there's a few things that you can do here. Obviously, you can have a quick overview of all of the notifications across your environment. I can then go into a specific machine. So this is the Active Directory domain controller for my demo environment, which we're looking at the moment. And I can do things like go into Active Directory, go into the domain that's been added here. I can search for a user, and I'll search for myself quickly. I can open this up. I can see when I last logged in, when last I issued a bad password. If password policy insists that I need to change the password at the next login, I can go and view my group allocations, and I can change that so I can add myself to a different group. And obviously I can do a couple of other things like disabling the account, resetting the password, and so on. And it's important to note that the interface that you're looking at the moment, right? So all of what you're seeing and this layout, this is exactly what the mobile applications look like. So whether you run it on your Android phone or on your iOS device, it looks exactly the same. And you get all of the same functionality, right? So one of the other things that I wanted to note about the Active Directory integration is when I showed the notifications, I mentioned that you can be informed if a user has locked themselves out. Obviously, maybe because they typed in the password wrong too many times. So that's a very easy use case to show the benefits of Pulseway, because what often happens is on our side, there are only 3 individuals in our office who are domain admins, right? And generally, at least one of the 3 people often are not in the office. And then between the other 2, myself and a colleague, we sometimes go out on lunch together. And what might happen is the 3rd person is not in the office. We're also not in the office, but we receive push notifications to our phones while we're sitting out of the office somewhere. And we can basically receive that notification, open up the application, see the user that's locked themselves out of Active Directory, click on the user, and immediately unlock them. So it means that we don't have to take out our laptop or carry our laptops with us in the first point, then connect to our VPN, because we don't allow remote RDP access unless you are on the VPN already, then connect to a machine that you can run Server Manager from, or connect directly to the domain controller, open Active Directory users and computers, find the user that's locked themselves out, and then subsequently unlock them. You're basically eliminating all of those connections and all of those clicks that you need to make, and you can basically unlock a person in a couple of seconds as opposed to, say, 5 minutes or whatever the case may be. And the same can be said for all of the other integrations. So whether or not it's integrating into Exchange or integrating into Zen or VMware. In the case of the Zen integration, if I just quickly show you, I can go into the server where I've added Zen integration. I can go into Zen server. I can view all of the hosts that are currently running on our cluster. So that's 5 hosts that we have in our Zen cluster, our virtualization cluster sitting in the office. I can go into a host. I can see its details, how much RAM it has available. I can then put that whole host in maintenance mode. I can also see all of the virtual machines that are currently running on that host. I can open up a virtual machine. I can stop and restart this machine. I can reset it. I can view and manage snapshots or whatever the case may be. So this is all, again, a lot of functionality that's available when integrating into any hypervisor. And it just so happens that we use Zen as the virtualization platform in our office, but you get even more integration into systems like VMware, for example. Then in the case of SSL certificates that I'm monitoring, we can see that that cert's going to expire in 194 days. In terms of CPU or RAM usage, I can click on any of these options and view a graph. The same can be said for things like network interfaces, for example. So I can go into network interfaces, I can select Ether4, and I can see traffic usage. So as you can see, all of this is extremely straightforward. It's extremely easy to understand. If I then go into services, for example, I can view the monitored services. I can then stop or restart any of those services, or start a service that is currently stopped. I can go into processes, so I can see what's using most of the CPU at the moment, or what's using most of the memory, and I can select that process and potentially kill it if necessary. So that's especially useful. Let's say you've been alerted about high CPU utilization on a server or on an endpoint. You can potentially remotely restart the service if it's the service that you're monitoring, or in the case of something happening on an endpoint with one of your customers, I can then, customer informs me using the support request option, hey, my machine is a little bit slow. I quickly open it up. I go to processes, and I can immediately see the processes that are responsible for the high RAM or CPU usage, and I can then kill it off remotely and ask them to reopen an application, for example. So there's a lot that you can do here, and I can also chat with the user remotely. I can see what's on their screen. I can also do remote execution of things within command prompt or within PowerShell. So as you can see, there's the layer there. So this is basically not a direct implementation. It basically takes the command that you've issued, sends it to the system in question, and then provides you with the result. So if I was to say something like ipconfig, for example, then I can execute this command. It sends the command, it waits for the reply, and then in a couple of moments I get the reply for this particular system, right? And the same is, it's exactly the same for PowerShell. Then in the case of Windows updates, I don't know if this machine has any updates available. It does. So if there's any updates, I'll be alerted, and I can come and I can actually remotely install the updates as well. And then once those updates are actually installed, you will also be prompted that that machine may require a reboot in order for those updates to obviously finish installing. In terms of security settings, I can do things like disabling the firewall for the different profiles available in Microsoft. In certain cases, depending on the antivirus platform in use, you can also be alerted around antivirus definitions that are out of date. I can view all of the applications that are installed on the system, and where appropriate, I will be able to uninstall it remotely as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of the interaction and a lot of the monitoring that is available out of the box, which I never even configured in the agent that I showed you, because it's accepted that a lot of that will be used by default. And then it comes down to that available features tab that I showed towards the end, where you can then maybe disable some of them that you simply don't need. Because this is a server, for example, it doesn't have any printers attached. It will never print anything, so I could go and untick the printers option to take this menu out and make this interface as clean as possible. Then in the case of something like my laptop, let me just open up my laptop. I'm obviously monitoring my temperature sensors as I showed you, and I've configured alerts, but I can also go in and I can now see the temperature for any of the CPU cores or the package or the drive, and if I click on that, it's exactly like any of the other options where I can then see a graph of the temperature over a time period. Then, of course, in the case of my laptop, I have the webcam option enabled. I can also go and view the event log. So I can actually go in and I can view all of the application events. I can then drill down into errors or warnings or information, and I can see what's actually going on. So there's an incredible wealth of monitoring information that you can view of any system at any given point in time. And again, I need to highlight that this is available in the Metro app that I'm showing you at the moment, as well as the mobile app, as well as the web interface. So as a next step, I'm just going to pause the sharing for a moment while I open up the web interface to show you a little bit further. Just give me 1 second. In the meantime, if there are any questions, please feel free to start sending them through. We'll obviously address those towards the end of the session, as I mentioned. Okay, so now I've logged into our Pulseway server. So basically what you can see here is there's an overview of all of the notifications that have been sent from the system. You can see an overview of the number of user accounts that we have in terms of your license allocation. You can see the number of systems that are being monitored, the number of remote desktop sessions. So this is all license information. You can see that they do very aggressive caching in Pulseway, so that's incredibly useful for an RMM tool because most of the data that you get in the web interface or in the Metro or Modern app or even in the mobile application is heavily cached, so you're obviously minimizing the number of requests that need to go through the server and actually get executed. In terms of user accounts, what I do is, obviously we've got a couple of users here, but what I do in our environment is I use a generic account to authenticate all of my agents, right? So I use one account to authenticate all of the systems that I need to monitor. So we can see all of those systems over here. And then what I do is I delegate access to those systems to any number of users. So in the case of my user, for example, I can go in and I can see that I've got full access to all of these systems and I need to receive notifications, where there's some of them that I have no access to, or whatever the case may be. So you can customize that by delegating access rather than enrolling one system with a specific user's account and then having to delegate access all over the show. So it becomes a mess. It becomes very difficult to manage. So I certainly prefer simply allocating one account to authenticate all of the agents and then delegating access from that one account, because it's obviously a lot easier to manage. Then I can always view a notification history. So I can view, let me just expand this date range. I'm going to go a week ago. I can search and now I can see all of the alerts that have been generated in my environment over this week's period. The same can be said for an audit log. So it's obviously important to know what your users are doing and what they have actually done on systems. So I'll be able to do exactly the same. I'll go back a week, I'll search, and I can see that I've done things like logging in. I ran the command ipconfig/all as I showed you in the session just a moment ago. Various people that have logged in. I submitted installation of updates on another machine on our network earlier today, actually yesterday in fact. So obviously you can see a history of all of the commands that were executed from Pulseway by any particular user. Then from a settings perspective, really straightforward, just thresholds on enforcing account or system limits, then limits for notifications. If you need to use a external email server to get notifications, then configuring that over here. I can also customize the template for the HTML that's used in the email, so I can make it, I can add my logo or whatever the case may be. And I can also customize the timeout for this web interface. So currently it is 120 seconds. Then in terms of systems, so I've obviously showed you the Metro or Modern app. This is the view in the Metro or Modern app that I showed you now in the web interface. So I can again select my domain controller. I can see all of the exact same options that I had before. I can also go in and I can manage Active Directory. I can go in, I can go and find my user, and I can manage that user all from the web interface. Now it's important to note that the web interface is one of the newer additions to at least the web interface is basically undergoing heavy development at the moment, which is why in certain cases you'll notice, like in the case of the StorageCraft integration, they say that it's only available in the mobile apps or in the Metro or Modern app that I showed you a moment ago. So if it's not yet available in the web interface, it will be available in the Metro app or on the mobile apps while they work on adding that integration into the web interface. And then exactly like before with the other server in question, I can go in, I can view the SSL certificates that I'm monitoring, and I can see that it expires in 194 days. So all exactly the same options that you see in the Metro Modern app are all available here. Then I can also drill down into a specific group. So I can go to a specific group, which as I mentioned, this would be say client A, client B, client C, and so on. I can also see different roles, like the different roles that are assigned to specific systems, like specifically any machine running Exchange or any machine running Hyper-V or any machine running IIS, for example. I can also tag machines. So I can go and I want to see any machine that's been tagged with domain controller. I can see those over there. I want to see any machine that's been tagged as a laptop. I can see that over there. I can tag any machine that's labeled as a server, and I can see those over there, and so on and so forth, right? So that's how you can essentially drill down into a specific type of machine that you use in terms of the tags that you set up, rather than needing to find it in a very long list of systems. Let's say you're monitoring thousands of systems, or if you've got tons and tons of customers, and you can obviously use this to work a little bit more efficiently. Then I can run a number of automated reports, and this is one of the features, or at least one of the improvements that we're waiting on earnestly at the moment. So over and above the pre-configured reports that you see here at the moment, they are also working on providing a on-demand and scheduled report delivery option so that you can customize the report so that you don't necessarily rely on these pre-configured templates, so that you can select various items that you want to run a report on and subsequently run it, or you can schedule the automated email delivery of that report to yourself or to a specific technician or to a group or to a customer, for example. Then you can also integrate into Slack at the moment, so that's one of the newest integrations as well. The idea here is, obviously, in terms of technical infrastructure, there will only be a handful of users that typically work on those systems. Because you don't have, say, your reception people or the people in accounts managing systems. But if you use Slack as your internal messaging system, you can add a channel or add integration from Pulseway into a specific channel so that when alerts get generated, they can be sent to everyone in that channel within Slack, which basically means that people that might not necessarily be responsible for fixing the problem can at least be informed of the problem. So you won't necessarily have users coming around asking, why is this thing down? Because they would have seen the notification, or at least hopefully have seen the notification in question. Then, of course, from an account perspective, I can just view the overview for my account. I can see some basic details. I want to receive email and push notifications potentially. I can enable two-step verification, which involves an email token that needs to be sent. You can also see any systems that were assigned with a specific user. So I'm not monitoring systems with this user, as I mentioned. I'm delegating access. And then, of course, any of my devices that are used to interact with the system. And then the setup guide is really straightforward, just instructions on how to configure various bits of information, right, for each of the platforms that are available, right? So I'm just going to digress very quickly again and just show you what it would look like if you need to configure the agent specifically on a Linux endpoint. So I'm just going to re-share my screen with you there. So this is basically the text file that is used for the Pulseway agent running, in this case, on an Ubuntu server, right? So it's a web server that we're running in our office, and I've basically configured various bits of alerting in here. So now I can go, and here I've got whether or not the machine is offline, so I obviously want to be informed about that. If the machine runs out of RAM or memory, or if the CPU usage has again exceeded 90% for a period of 5 minutes, I want to be informed about that. So it's basically like any headless Linux application. The configuration is obviously typically done in some type of text file. So that's how Pulseway works on a Linux server. So really, really straightforward. So now I'm just going to pause once more, and I'm just going to have a quick look at any of the questions that may have come through during the course of our session. So obviously, please take this time to send through any questions that you might have. In the meantime, I'm just going to have a look at some of these questions. I got a question here. Can this be used to manage single user machines like in a service center? Absolutely. So as I've shown you, I went in and I viewed my laptop status, for example. So I showed you how I can view the temperature sensors on my laptop. I can go into services that are running or processes that are running, or I can also obviously use the remote desktop capability to jump straight onto that machine and help that user with something, or to do maintenance, whatever the case may be. So yes, certainly you can do that. I don't have any other questions so far, so I'm going to give a couple of moments for anyone to send any questions that they may have. No other questions so far. I will give you all a couple of minutes to compose those questions and send them through. While we're waiting for that, I always mention this in our webinar sessions, but if you have not yet registered for our partner wiki, please feel free to do so at wiki.esetafrica.com. You will be asked for your partner ID in order for us to prove that you are a legitimate ESET partner, because obviously there's sensitive information in that portal. So you can go there, you can register, we'll approve your sign up. And then once you've been approved, you'll be able to log in and you can view all sorts of information pertaining to all of our products. We'll have our pricing on there. We will have various videos. We'll also be uploading all of our webinars onto the platform. We'll also have a range of documentation like data sheets and battle cards in order to differentiate our product to the competitors, for example, and a number of, a range of information that would be of use to you as a partner. So please make the time to go and register, because it will certainly help you sell the products and educate yourself around the solutions in more detail. Still no further questions. I mean, we don't have a very big turnout to our webinar today, unfortunately, so that might be one of the reasons that we don't have a lot of questions coming in, but I will give you guys a couple of moments longer to send anything through that you might have. While we're on the same topic, if you are interested in obtaining a trial, we are happy to provide you with the necessary information. We've got a specific link that you use to download the installer for Pulseway. Basically, the requirements is you need to have a Windows server, anything from 2008 or later. And the only thing that you need to do on that server is you need to install an instance of SQL. So that can be a fully fledged SQL, or it can be SQL Express. SQL Express is more than capable of running the Pulseway environment. So in the case of SQL Express, as an example, you install it, and that's literally all you need to do. The installer will go and provision and configure IIS for you. It'll go and into IIS and configure the application pools that you need. Literally all you will need to do from an installation perspective in terms of prepping the server that you intend to install Pulseway on is get it up and running and install any instance of SQL. And then the only other requirement in order to actually use Pulseway is a SSL certificate for the fully qualified domain name that you choose to run it on. So that can maybe be pulse.yourcompanyname.com or monitoring. Or it can be anything you want, obviously. As long as you have an SSL certificate for that host name, you can go and add that, and then you'll be able to monitor any, obviously set it up and do anything that I've showed you during the presentation so far. Okay, so let me just see one other question that's come through here. Pulseway Online is both cloud and on-premise setups. Are we only having on-premise available for us now? We only offer the on-premise version, right? And the reason for that is quite straightforward. You can happily go and sign up for the software as a service version, but you will run into a number of problems, and you run into various security risks, right? Because if you want to add something like monitoring your Exchange server, for example, or monitoring your Active Directory, or monitoring ESET Remote Administrator. In various cases, you need to provide the FQDN or the IP address of that server. So if my server, or if my Pulseway is hosted by Pulseway themselves, it's important to note that those servers are based in the States and in Europe. Not only am I running into the problems in terms of international latency, depending on where you are located and where the agent is running on the systems that you want to monitor and integrate with, but now you also need to expose potentially sensitive or critical systems to Europe and the States, because it now means that you may need to provide an IP address or an FQDN, which could only be available inside your network, and now that needs to be made available external to your network in order for you to potentially manage it from a number of other locations. And then secondly, you also run into, as I mentioned, the latency, which in our experience happens to be the biggest problem. Because when you rely on something like the remote desktop capability, right? Now, it's important to note that the way that Pulseway works is you connect from wherever you are, let's say using my laptop, using the remote desktop application, then you connect to your Pulseway server, and the Pulseway server connects to the agent, right? So if I'm sitting in South Africa and I'm using the hosted version, the software as a service version provided by Pulseway, I have to connect from South Africa all the way to Europe as the closest destination, and then all the way back to the agent, which can be located in South Africa or Kenya or Botswana or whatever the case may be. So now you're going to have a very slow experience. So we only sell the on-premise version, but you can get the software as a service version online, as you can see on their website. But we certainly recommend against it for the reasons that I've mentioned. The other important thing that I can note on that same topic or on that same question while I wait for any other questions to come through is, remember, with all of our products that we offer, we are happy to assist you with demos. We are happy to assist you in selling the solution to your customers. And we can also help you get your instance up and running. Whereas if you go direct to Pulseway and get the software as a service version, as opposed to getting the on-premise version, which is what we're the distributors for in East Africa, then you don't get that capability. Pulseway are not going to do demos on your behalf. And obviously you can get support, but we help you with demos. We help you with engaging with your customers. We can, in some cases, even come with you on site in order to assist you in selling the solution to an important customer, for example. So that's, again, another reason. Over and above the technical implementations, there's also sales considerations to be made. I will give a couple of moments longer for anyone else to send through any last questions that they may have before we wrap up this iteration of our webinar series. Okay, it doesn't look as though there's anything further, so that effectively wraps up this session. Thank you everyone for attending another instance of the ESET East Africa webinar series. We hope it was obviously informative. If you have any questions following the session, please feel free to email us on either support@esetafrica.com or partners@esetafrica.com if you need any pricing information, or if you need assistance in getting quotes done, or if you need further demos, or if you need help with engaging with the customer and trying to offer them the solution, or if you need a trial, please get a hold of us and we'll assist you going forward. So thanks again for attending and have a good day, everyone.